welcome to the first episode ever of Women Just Like You, a podcast full of advice for women in the middle of their careers, directly from women who are in the middle of theirs. I'm your host, Audrey the Career Woman, a fellow mid-career woman, and we are so lucky to have Arissan Nicole join us today. Arissan is a certified and internationally nominated career and confidence coach and workforce empowerment expert who I met through a career development program at work. She is absolutely incredible, helping women get the confidence to do the exact same big career pivot she has done not once, but twice. Arissan empowers her clients to take control of their careers and leads women through the job search process from the inside out. She's been working for a decade across several industries and job functions and has done some of the squiggliest of career squiggles out there. We'll get insight into Arissan's early days as a young Latina working in international trade and healthcare, talk about both of her entrepreneurial ventures, and even get into cycle syncing as a business owner. Plus, the benefit of having a career coach on the show is that she learns from her clients all day, every day. So we'll also get some themes from what she's seeing across women in the middle of their careers right now. Talk about getting an impactful episode today. And with that, let's buckle up and dive into it. All right, Arissan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to have this conversation about your career and kind of what your life looks like today.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So to start us off, I would love to know, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
When I was a kid, the first thing that comes to mind is I wanted to be the first female president. And I remember as I was getting older, I thought, I don't want to be the first female president because I want a female president before I become the age where I could be president. But it was pretty much a theme for any job or anything I was interested in. I wanted to be the first female. So I wanted to be a female sushi master. I wanted to be like a female NFL referee, just stuff that I didn't actually care about necessarily. I just wanted to be like the first female, or show that women could do it too.
Yeah. Well, that's great because women can do it all. We know we can. We can do it better than men sometimes. So I love to hear I want to be the first woman something. The sushi master would be really interesting. That would be great. Are you really into sushi?
Yeah. And because of that, I think when I was 9 years old, my parents for Christmas, or my mom got me the whole sushi making kit and all the different things. And I didn't get into it. My mom got really good at making sushi. So that was like the joke.
Well, hopefully she's still really good at making sushi and you get some good homemade sushi every now and then.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Cool. Well, thanks for putting us into the episode. I would love to turn this over to you and just have you tell us a little bit about your career path to date.
Yeah. So I actually started off my career doing something that I went to college for, which I know not a lot of folks do. Right. So I studied international studies in college. I minored in Chinese, and then out of my first career job out of college was I worked for an international trade organization called National Center for APEC, and that I traveled a lot around the Asia Pacific, and that was a really wonderful introduction to my career. And I had it was a small organization. I worked with a lot of great people, and I pivoted because the international trade wasn't something I was actually that interested in. And as much as I love the travel and I love my coworkers, there was something I needed to pivot to. I wanted something a little bit more mission driven, working more with people. I was doing a lot of programming and events. And so then that was when I pivoted to pediatric healthcare. So I worked at the local children's hospital in Seattle, and I started working in engagement recognition and in consulting work. Became a consultant there, where I was doing really around staff support, well-being. We talked about resilience. And from that, I was there through the pandemic, and healthcare in the pandemic was really fun. And I had always known that I had wanted to start my own business and work for myself. And I had, while I was working at NCAPAC, me and my friend on the side started Seattle Self-Defense, which was a self-defense business, bringing self-defense in a very practical way to folks where you don't have to know a bunch of martial arts. And we were 2 women, whereas a lot of self-defense classes are taught by like bigger, older men.
Yeah.
And that was like that was my first taste of entrepreneurship. Learned a lot of lessons I'm thankful for, so that when I decided to leave the corporate world and get my life coach certification and start my own life coaching business, I had learned a lot from that kind of side hustle business that me and my friend had started. And for coaching, I have always loved coaching. It's kind of different. All coaches that I've talked to, they were doing some sort of coaching before they actually officially started coaching, just naturally in who they are. And so I first started, my first niche was an empowerment and belonging coach for women of color. When I left the corporate world, I was extremely burnt out, extremely burnt out. And I had a bad taste in my mouth. And so I needed, I joke that I needed to decompress from the corporate world a little bit. And
I feel like a lot of people need to do that.
Yeah, it takes longer than you think it would take. It doesn't just take like a 2-week vacation. And I realized that I really enjoy kind of this professional development, career development. It's always been something like my friends came to me for like negotiating tips, how to pivot, what kind of jobs, interview help. And I really love that. So that's when I made the pivot within my coaching business to do more that career and confidence coaching, helping folks with the pivot. I had gone through pivots, and I've done pivots where, I got a job through networking, and I've gotten a job from just applying via LinkedIn with no contacts. I also know how it feels when you're interviewing and trying to figure out what you want to do, but you don't know what you want to do. It can be really demoralizing and exhausting because you're going on 1,000,005 coffee dates. Yep. And so that's where now I really focus on helping women pivot their careers to feel more aligned. And I do so from what I call an inside out approach, because a lot of women, especially in their mid-careers, which is usually my clientele, majority is folks kind of in that mid-career, is helping them identify what it is they want and building up maybe confidence again, or learning to trust themselves in their decision making, and showing them that they do have skills that can pivot. You just kind of have to dig in a little bit, but it's there.
That's great. I love to hear the pivots both within your careers, going from from one industry to another industry to entrepreneurship to within your business doing a slight pivot as well. We'll get into the pivots and your coaching business a little bit later in our conversation, but it's a great preview for everybody listening on kind of what's going to come around in the second half of our conversation today. So thanks for that summary. I would love to dive into what it was like being a young Latina working internationally in trade and then also healthcare back at home.
Yeah. For my first job, I think what was unique about it was I worked internationally. So in APAC, which is made up of 21 Asia Pacific countries, Peru and Chile, Mexico were countries, and then there were Southeast Asia countries, and then US and Canada. So I was really introduced to a wide range of people. And the biggest thing when I was starting out my career that I was most self-conscious about was my age, because a lot of folks, my counterparts at different trade organizations, were in their 30s when I was, 22, 23. And I would always shy away from when they would ask me, "Oh, how old are you?" And I always had felt that when I answered that question, I could see something change in how they looked at me. And I felt like I didn't love that. So for the most part, though, the organization I worked for, it was the president is a woman, a lot of international trade, government affairs folks from that board members that we worked with were all women. So it was really cool first introduction to my career. And then in healthcare, when I pivoted, this was kind of the first time I went from a small organization that had, less than a dozen people in it to a 10,000 plus organization. So that was the first time that I really felt, my identity kind of came into question a little bit more. Things are happening. And they had ERGs, or employee resource groups. We called them inclusion networks. And that was my first time experiencing an inclusion network. And there was HOLA, which was the Hispanic Latina inclusion network. And that was the first time I felt a really strong connection that I didn't even know I was missing or was there through these ERGs and inclusion groups. So I always tell, and I know that you are an ERG leader at your organization.
Yeah.
My biggest advice to folks is join the ERGs, because they help not just your career development, but they help with you feeling more connected to your coworkers and people at work, and you meet people across the organization that you don't usually meet.
I really resonate with both of the points you made there. Obviously, ERGs are very close to my heart. I've been a lead for almost 2 years, been very involved in the women's ERG at my company. And then also the age point you made, where I'm usually the youngest person in the room and have been for my entire career so far. And having that inherent bias that comes into a conversation when someone finds out how old you are. Just this week, someone asked me how old I was, and I go, I don't answer that question. Sorry. Because I know that when I say how old I am, that there's going to be some bias that creeps into those conversations. So it's really great to hear I'm not alone in feeling that way, especially at this point in my career. So thank you for sharing that, because even now you've just made me feel a little bit more comfortable in my experiences. So thank you.
Yeah, it's huge, because I think we're going to get to a point too where the switch happens, where it's how young and then how old. And that's another thing too, where it's I tell women that I'm working with, don't put the year you graduate on your resume, don't do all these things, because especially for women, there's a lot of age bias, whether you're young or you're old or you're in between.
Unfortunately, that's where we're at, but hopefully one day, knock on wood, that we don't have to do that anymore. Cool. So you mentioned joining an ERG really helped make you feel like you belonged at Seattle Children's Hospital and really felt connected with your identity. What do you wish you could tell your younger self as you navigated those experiences?
I wish that I had trusted myself more when I was younger, and I put myself first in what I wanted. I was always a very hard worker, and I think sometimes I would just take it or work through it.
Yeah.
And I had some folks that were great supports. I wish I seeked out more mentorship when I was younger. I think I always craved it. I didn't know where to go for it. And so that was something when I got to the point where I had folks under me that I really prioritized mentorship while they were working for me, because I craved that. And I didn't really understand negotiating my salary. I didn't negotiate my first salary. And I felt that years later, after working within that organization, how much harder it was when I started so low, that as you're getting promoted within, your base salary is lower than folks coming in or at different levels. And I didn't have anyone in my life to talk to about that. And if I did, I didn't realize it. So that was something I would definitely tell younger Arissan to really seek out that mentorship, because it's not just in confidence and career development, but it's on the bottom line with money too.
Did you negotiate your second job after having that experience?
So yeah, so for my second job, I did. There was a salary band for that one. And I remember the director asked me what salary I wanted or what was my salary expectation, which she's not actually supposed to do. And so that was a time where I negotiated up a higher higher in the salary band when I got the job. So absolutely.
Yeah, good. I think that's a lesson for everyone too. I didn't negotiate my first job, and I felt that there was a point where I got a raise and they said, this is one of the highest raises in the company, and we're sorry it's so little, because I had started out at a lower salary that I didn't negotiate. And so I learned that lesson when I switched jobs and was able to get a pretty significant bump. So for everyone listening, do your research, make sure you negotiate your salary, because it does have an impact on your income.
And you can negotiate your salary even if it's your first job. I think for me, I was so relieved to get hired.
Same.
And not work. I took the call when I was working at a bar. I was in the storage closet when I got the job offer. So I was just thankful to not be a, busser. And I didn't think that I could negotiate. And she called me over the phone and made the offer. And I didn't know to say, thanks so much for the offer. Can you send this in an email so I can look over it? I felt the pressure to accept the job over the phone. So you can negotiate even if you don't have career experience. And even if they try to offer it to you over the phone, just ask for it sent in an email so you have time to kind of compose yourself and be like, okay, let me ask for even a little bit more to show yourself that you can.
Yeah, +1 to that. Everyone listening, let's reiterate that. If you get a job offer over the phone, ask for it in an email so you have time to do some research and can look over it. Say thank you, be gracious, but get it in writing first.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. You mentioned earlier that you had started a martial arts studio several years ago, and then obviously you're now a self-employed career coach. Sounds a little bit like being a business owner is in your genes. So would love to hear what advice you would give to people who are thinking of becoming their own boss.
Yeah. The first one is knowing what it is about being your own boss that most interests you.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that I wanted to own my own business before I knew what business I wanted to do. And I love the freedom and setting my own schedule. And one thing too, folks don't tell you is how hard it is to run your own business and to get it off the ground. I think so much of social media and things we see online, you see all these 6 figures in 6 months or 6 weeks. And that stuff is not saying it's not possible, but that's rare. There's definitely a buildup. It definitely can feel very isolating because you're working all by yourself. You're having to decide every single decision. And a lot of folks, I'm a coach, especially when you start out, the amount of coaching that you do or I did was way smaller than the amount of business admin operations work you do. And it wasn't until, you can start hiring an assistant was such a big deal for me in my business because I could finally start passing off those things. And so I love entrepreneurship, and it's not for everyone. And so really understanding the why behind why you would want to be an entrepreneur and how you want to feel in your entrepreneurship, because maybe it's you don't want to have all the responsibility. You can't handle not having a steady paycheck or not knowing when money is going to come in. And so maybe it's looking for a job that gives you just a little bit more flexibility. And I'm not trying to shy people away from entrepreneurship, but even clients that want to be into entrepreneurship, when we start talking, I have to sometimes peel behind the curtain because they're like, oh my gosh, I can't figure it out, or this feels so hard, or I don't know what to do, or what is this decision? And I'm like, that's entrepreneurship. You're always figuring it out. You're always pivoting. You're always tweaking. You're always taking lessons. What worked 1 month might not work the next month, might not work the next year. You're kind of always evolving, and you're figuring out as you go. Your systems and things are going to, you're going to start certain lower level, going to hodgepodge, and then you're going to have to build and grow and adapt. So it's a lot of moving pieces, but I'm someone that really loves change. Like I could never be at a job where I was doing the same task over and over and over again. I like new projects. I like new things. So that really works well for entrepreneurship with me because I can always change and pivot, and I like that I make the decision. And then every once in a while, I'm like, I wish someone would just make a decision for me and give me a paycheck that I knew was coming in. It's like, oh, wait, I'm that person for myself. Cool.
Yeah. That also must feel really empowering, though, especially when you've had like a good couple of months or you've made a decision that your clients really respond to, or, you know, the public really responds to. It must be really empowering as well.
Yeah, it is. And I think my biggest lesson was learning to trust myself as a business owner, because I felt that I was so new to entrepreneurship. I was outsourcing a lot of my decision making to folks that had been in the industry longer, had known business, because I'm like, they must know better. But then what I was doing there was I was outsourcing my voice and the trust within myself of like what I want to do. So the more I started going, what is it that lights me up? What is it I want to do? The better, more money I brought in, more clients I brought in, the better I felt, because I was operating from a place of real integrity and not trying to do what I thought other folks wanted or what I thought should be done. And so that would probably also be the biggest advice, was learning how to trust that voice when I have no idea what's going to happen too, because I've never done it before, but just trusting that internal voice and beacon, because that's what drew me to entrepreneurship. And that's what usually draws people to entrepreneurship. So it's so funny that draws you to it. And then as soon as you kind of get into it, you outsource or you try to get people to tell you what to do. And you really have to learn to really trust yourself. It's such a big lesson in self-trust and self-love.
And that actually sounds like a theme. That was the thing you had given your younger self, was to trust yourself being in the room, and you're reiterating it now, trusting yourself. You know, if you're going into entrepreneurship, trust the decisions, because what's right for someone else might not be right for you. And being an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, you know, it's all about who you are and like your point of view. And so keep that point of view pretty central, it sounds like.
Absolutely. And I just think for women in general, that self-trust, because much we outsource because we get a lot of shoulds or expectations, and that self-trust and learning that, even if you don't go into entrepreneurship, even if you're working in, you know, the career world your whole life, corporate world the whole life, still that trust is so, so important. And I see so many women that have lost that or have never been as connected to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great points. Great points. It sounds like you really love helping women, also love being a career coach, and you've been able to support yourself full time with your business, which is really, really great. You know, not a lot of people can do that. So kudos to you. What do you love about your job? You get to help women. There's also the admin stuff that you got an assistant to help you with. What do you love about your job?
I love empowering women, but I love the moment when I'm talking with a client, especially maybe like kind of in our later sessions, where they come and they've started to kind of self-coach themselves, and I can see the switch that they have had in how they view themselves and how they make decisions. That's one of my favorite things, is when someone comes in, they don't have any confidence, they don't have boundaries, they don't have trust, and then we're working and all of a sudden they come and tell me like a story of them having, you know, set a boundary and done it scared, but still done it and feeling good and strong about that. So I do love being able to work with a bunch of different women too, because even though it's career coaching and my women, women, my girls want to find a different job. Their stories and where they come from, where they're at in their career, it's also different. So each client experience, even though, you know, my packages and stuff is so different. And I love that. I love that I don't know what's going to happen within a coaching session when we start. I love being able to make decisions on something, maybe it's like a workshop or on like content or like have an idea. I love that I can just be like, this is what I want to do. Let me go do it. Yeah. And I don't have to get 5 million approvals. And I have loved the flexibility of my schedule and being able to, like on Mondays, I don't have meetings, and being able to really listen to my body and like work on my cycles. Like I've been doing a lot of work on like cycle syncing with my menstruation cycle and how I work, and knowing that when that comes up, I can, go curl up with a book and read, when I start my period, versus having to force it through being at a desk all day. And so that has been so nice. And it's allowed me to really be in touch with myself and my body in a way that I wasn't before when I worked in the corporate world.
If you don't have health, you don't have anything, right?
Yeah.
Life is a marathon, not a sprint. And so that's so cool to hear. You're actually the first person I've ever talked to that has done this. I first learned about syncing like workouts to your cycle probably like 6 or 8 months ago, but not really the rest of your life. So what kind of spurred you to make that adjustment, or was it a slow kind of migration to that type of schedule?
Well, I remember I've always had really bad cramps around my period. And I remember one period when I was still in corporate, I was having such bad cramps on my period that I was making me throw up and sick, and I couldn't leave work. And I was like under my desk because I had to work late and everyone was gone. So I'm like huddled on my desk, maybe going to the bathroom to throw up, just waiting to and I had never experienced that. And I was like, this isn't normal. Like I shouldn't feel like this. I think when I had my own schedule, I had the openness in a way that I felt like I didn't when I was working 10+ hour days, to really pay attention to my body. And it kind of was a slow build in that sense. And because of that, I could pay attention to the patterns that I saw. So all of a sudden I realized I would get these creative spurts where I almost couldn't sleep because I had all these ideas flowing. And I'd be so excited. And then I realized it was at the same time, in my cycle. And I would always beat myself up for not being able to move for 3 days on my period, being so miserable and being in so much pain. And then as soon as I started like allowing myself to not do work and just lay in bed all day, I felt so much better. So once I started doing that, then I've started reading books and talking to anyone that has a menstrual cycle to really pay attention to it, because it makes a huge impact. And even if you can't set your own schedule, it at least helps, because maybe when you're planning certain projects, or for me, when I'm having a creative block, sometimes I need to look at my menstrual cycle, because I'm like beating myself up because I'm like, why can't I figure this out? And I look at my cycle and I'm like, this is not your creative juice flow and time. And then it's sure enough in, 2 weeks time, it all just comes. And so it's also allowed me more grace within myself, because I go, okay, let me work with my body, not against it, or beat it up for something it's not.
Amazing. I just we need just to pause, because that was so cool. I'm going to have to look into this, because I've seen people on social media saying it's so great, and just hearing your story on how you've been able to give yourself more grace as well, and to say it's okay. I'll be able to do this in a week. Not this weekend, but I'll be able to do this next weekend. And it's all about not data per se, but it's knowing yourself and just knowing what your body's capable of at different times of the month. That is just so cool. So everyone rewind, listen to that again, then come back.
The In the Flow, FLO, is a book that I read. I can't remember the author's name.
We'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah, but that was a great one, because she does a really great job of also explaining the different rhythms. So we're on a 28-day cycle, and men are on the 24-hour cycle, and our world's built on the 24-hour cycle. And she does a great job of just kind of setting the scene of what's been happening, why you kind of struggle with it, how we don't get education around it. And then talks about the different things that you can focus on, like food, exercise, rest, based on your different cycles. So I would definitely recommend reading that book if you're interested.
We'll put it in the show notes. I will definitely add it to my reading list because I'm just so inspired by this conversation. So thank you. Thank you. Cool. So kind of along that line, actually, knowing yourself, knowing your cycles, knowing when you can be creative, when it's best to do maybe some personal development, read a book on the couch. What are some tasks or activities that you do in your business that people might not know about? And how do you kind of sync that with how your monthly cadence is going?
This is the check-ins that I do, I think, which aren't necessarily business related in the sense of it's like pulse checks on how I'm feeling within my business, because we can so often get on autopilot that I like to set up check-ins every month, week, quarter, and I don't always check in, every week, but I also have, same with the cycle syncing. I have very much noticed the different seasons. And, we're in winter, and I'm like trying to, at the beginning of the year, I was trying to like force getting motivation to go when it's, pouring down rain and freezing cold, and knowing that my business has cycles too. And so the expectation that it's going to look the same and operate the same way every day of the year is not true. And so learning has been a big learning on how to work with the cycle of my business and the seasons of my business and ebb and flow with that. And so it's been putting in practices that, one, allow me to do that check-in, and then two, allow me to be okay with that check-in. So it's a lot of, even though it's business, I do a lot of work personally. So like meditations, journal reflection, self-care work, because that is so vital in order for me to show up in my business how I want to show up. And I feel like you can't skip out on those. And when I skip out on those, I can feel it, because then all of a sudden my brain gets scattered. I feel overwhelmed. And I'm like, what's going on? And then I look and I'm like, I haven't done any of my self-care practices, and it's impacting my business. And that is one thing that I don't think folks, you might think those are two separate things. Like, yeah, my self-care, my personal life, and then my business life, but they're very much integrated, especially for me, when you work for yourself, everything's connected. And that's also when something else is going on in my personal life that feels really hard. If things in my business feel very hard, I go, okay, what else is going in my life? And recognizing those connections and creating routines to help me navigate that, even if it's not as directly business related.
That's really great. We are people first, kind of employees second, and understanding that what goes on in our day-to-day impacts how we show up at work, even in the case of a solopreneur. I hope people really take away that you should work on yourself, because you're just going to be a better person to your friends, your family, your coworkers, and you're going to be able to give 100% as you're taking care of yourself in that way. So that's really great to hear.
Yeah.
As a career coach, you see tons of women who are navigating career decisions every day. You mentioned earlier in our conversation that a lot of your clients are in the middle of their careers. And this time of year, a lot of people are, doing a check-in with themselves on their careers. It's the new year. Is this kind of what I want to be doing? And sometimes it's encouraging to know that what's going on in our lives is also going on in someone else's, that we aren't really alone in our experience. Can you share some themes that you've seen recently that our listeners would find reassuring?
Yeah. I think a huge theme is almost maybe a majority of my clients that come in that have kind of this low confidence, self-confidence, trust, usually are working at a company or under a manager that is pretty toxic. And they come in really doubting themselves, doubting their abilities, and not quite correlating it with their boss. They know that it's toxic and they, are miserable and they're sad. And then as they start to look at their job or their career, they don't think that they can get a job with more money, that they're worried they have to downgrade. They don't think their skills are transferable. And as soon as we start talking, it's this correlation that it is when you have a bad manager. I mean, that I can't remember the stat that people leave managers before they leave jobs.
Yeah.
That is not a forever change in who you are, that it is very common for your confidence to take a hit under a bad manager, and you can build that confidence back up. And that is very common what I see, because it's really hard to, when you start the job searching process, when your confidence is lower, because you're not going for the big jobs as much, or it's harder to talk about your accomplishments and the achievements that you've had, because you're like, well, I don't know. And so that is a very big theme that I see. And another one is, I know, especially in the tech world, a lot of kind of negativity around the job market right now. And, I have clients getting interviews. I have clients that are applying and hearing back within a week. And yes, there's layoffs and there's a lot of folks that are hiring. And I think that's always kind of the nature of the job search. And so almost giving folks, it's like hope and possibility, because if you just keep waiting because you're like, this is not the right time, it's never going to be the right time to apply for a job. And the more you can do it with intentionality, you're going to find that job no matter what kind of environment the general corporate or world is in. Yeah. And so that's another thing too, is you can let that negativity really weigh you down and give you no hope when you start applying. So then you're also not applying the same kind of way. But there are jobs out there. People are getting interviewed. People are getting hired. The biggest thing is to start.
And starting is so important. And maybe going back to something we were just talking about those check-ins, if maybe it's time for a career change, as you just said, with layoffs, there are also companies that are hiring. And maybe it's one of those times in people's lives where they take a minute and take a pause and just say, is this the right career for me? Is this the right industry for me? If it's a yes, great, then you can focus your search that way. But it can also be an opportunity to, work with a career coach or go buy like a career workbook, that you can work through on your own to kind of do a little bit of self-reflecting and kind of figure out what that next step should be. So I like that message of hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And everything you just said, yes, because so often when we're, again, on the autopilot with our jobs and we're kind of just chugging away, layoffs or something else can feel really devastating. And maybe it will be the first time in years that you've paused and thought about what do I actually like to do? What do I want to do? And that is such a huge and important questions to ask yourself.
Yeah. Love it. Love all of that. So I would love to hear about a client who's changed careers or has had a really transformational journey with you, whose story really stands out. Because I think going along that message of hope, I would love to hear someone that, you look back on that story and it's a really positive one.
I have a few and they have similar themes. So maybe it's kind of a themed one, but really the pivot, because that's really what I like to help folks on, is pivoting from, maybe it's a different industry, maybe it's a different role, because that can feel really scary and hard to do. And so I had a client that was working just wild hours, and it was such a toxic environment. And she came and worked with me and she was so exhausted. She was so burnt out. She was traveling a lot for work too. So she was like barely home. And I think sometimes when people feel super busy and overwhelmed, they're like, I don't even have time for coaching and career coaching. And she intentionally made time because she was feeling so down and tired and exhausted that she's like, I can't even think about how to do this. So that's when she came to me. And what was really awesome is what I like to do at the beginning when I work with clients is ask them kind of like ideal situations of how do you want to feel in your job? What's most important to you? Kind of get an idea of their values, a bunch of different kind of grounding questions to get an idea of what it is, even if they don't know the role or the industry they want. Know the feeling that they want, know the work-life balance they want, know the kind of company culture that they want. And she was looking to pivot out of, I think, B2B sales in the beverage industry. And she was looking to pivot and was having kind of that confidence on how can I pivot? What is this going to look like? And when she got the interview for this other job, which was in a completely different industry, and she wasn't sure if she was going to take it. And she was telling me all the things about the job and where she had questions about. And I went and pulled up. This is my favorite thing to do with clients. I like to pull up what she had said when we first started meeting. And I was like, okay, this is what you told me that you wanted. And just reflecting that back to her, she was able to go, like, take a deep breath and go, oh my gosh, every single thing on that list is in this job offer. And I'm over here trying to like pick apart these little things, but this is really where this is everything that I said I wanted. And here it is. She was able to make a decision from this place of, this was her information. And so she took this job, and we kind of continued working like a month check-ins, and her hearing how she was already thriving in this like new industry and this new job, and like seeing the career development that was possible, and knowing that she was already talking about potential pivots to other areas and other industries was so huge, because she like could sleep again. Like you could see like the stress was out of her eyes. She wasn't traveling all over the place. And I know that can seem very simple or not like this super exciting story, but I think that's what folks want in a career pivot. They want something that allows them to have the balance in their life. They can see the progression and the next steps within their career, because their current career, there was no career path forward. And so this kind of just hope and realization that she knew what she wanted from the beginning. She just had to, take the action towards it. And then when the decision came, it was like, oh, wait, this is exactly what I wanted. I can have exactly what I want. And here I am doing it. And I do feel so much better. And I have so much hope for the future of my career, because, she's mid-career too. So she has a lot of years left.
I love that. And I think that's important, so important for people to hear that sometimes the pivot isn't, going from sales to like being an attorney or something huge like that. Sometimes the pivot is like the lifestyle that your job allows you to have. And the fact that you could see that your client was sleeping better, I think sleep is so important. And, I think we're all trying to sleep more. And so even just hearing that piece, that your client was able to be more content, have that opportunity to do a reflection on the beginning of the career search and what the job was going to offer them. And then here, in a year or two, maybe make another pivot that they feel empowered to do. That's just so inspiring and proves that how valuable a coach can be if you're at a pretty critical part of your career or decision-making process.
Yeah. And you don't always have to be burnt out. Like I would love for folks not to feel burnt out before they make a pivot. Like, it'd be great if you kind of can recognize the signs, which hopefully after you've made the pivot, that you can. But so often when you're in like burnout mode, you don't realize that you're kind of a zombie in the rest of your life, that at least I was, and I know clients and friends, I was very like numb to a lot of things going on. So my relationships weren't as great. They were still there, but they weren't as strong. I wasn't as attentive. I wasn't doing the things I love. I have clients that will say something as simple as, I love to read and I haven't read because I've been so stressed and tired. And that feels so simple. But when you all of a sudden can sit down on the couch and crack open a book and not have that stress weighing in on you, that is huge. That I think that for me is why I love doing it. Those small changes, because that's actually what you feel in the day to day. The big, huge pivots are great in that time, and then what happens? If you don't have those pivots, those small pivots in your day to day and your routines, then even a big pivot is going to feel overwhelming eventually if you haven't done the work to support yourself.
Yeah. It all goes back to prioritizing yourself, trusting yourself, making sure that your next step is you've thought it through and you're being intentional about whatever decision you end up making. I love that. I love that. So we're getting to the end of our conversation, and I would love to hear what you imagine your career to look like in the next 5 to 10 years. I know you've been a coach for a couple of years now. You're really finding your stride. You're really successful at what you do. Do you imagine any more pivots in the future, either within your business or maybe a complete pivot to another entrepreneurial venture?
Yes. I'm sure that I will pivot because that's just the person that I am. I do know that what's not changed is my goal and desire and passion to empower women and girls to be themselves, to learn who they are and find strength in themselves and belief in themselves. So that has never faltered, and I don't imagine that will falter. So that's kind of what I say my guiding light is in like my decision making. So everything that I'm doing, it needs to align there. I just started coaching middle school girls basketball, and there's a part of me going, uh-oh, am I also going to be like coaching basketball a lot more, just coaching all the different things in my life. But I know kind of this building is helping and empowering women through their careers. So within the 5-10 years, I think this is what's exciting about entrepreneurship, is not knowing where I'm going to be in 5-10 years, but knowing there are certain things that I want to have more impact. I want to be able to reach more folks in a way that I'm not reaching them now. I love to collaborate and work with folks more. So really kind of growing in the way that I'm working with more folks. I'm having that influence in a different kind of way. What it is I'm doing specifically, that's sometimes not as important as how I want to feel and the type of people I want to work with. That is usually how, when I plan my 5-10 years, those are the things I focus on versus what exactly I am doing, because I've learned that you can pivot and sometimes you have no idea what that pivot is, or it comes out of nowhere and you kind of just ride it and go with it and be like, well, this is an opportunity that is here, and so I'm going to take it. It's not an opportunity that I would have set out for myself. So that's what I'm most excited for in the next 5 to 10 years, is continuing to grow this kind of mission of empowering women and girls.
Well, you've already had an impact on me in this conversation today. So I have no doubt that impact will continue to grow, impacting women and girls of all ages, like everywhere. So I'm really excited for your next couple of years and to see where that kind of goes. To close us out today, is there any last piece of advice you would give to women who are in the middle of their careers right now?
I would tell them to really put themselves first. So do like we've talked about, that pulse check of what it is that matters to them, what it is they want, where they feel they need support, and don't be afraid to ask for it or go for it. There's this quote, and I'm not going to remember who it was, but fear is the anticipation of future pain.
Mhm.
And I love that quote because that for me just tells me if I have fear, I'm worried that I'm going to hurt in the future. So let me leave that in the future and let me follow the things that scare me. And that's the thing with for folks in their mid-career. I'm like, if something kind of scares you a little bit and puts you out of your comfort zone, use that as your guiding light to push you and follow that. Because that's kind of the nudge of how you grow. And you're in your mid-career. So you have time too. You don't have to do everything right now. You have time, and give yourself that time, give yourself that space, because if you're hustling and you're at burnout now, unless you make changes now, things are not going to get any better. And if anything, your health is going to suffer even more. Your relationships are going to suffer even more. So this is a time to really take care of yourself. And, you've probably done the 20s hustle already. You know what that feels like. So this is the time to do hey, let me check in with me. Let me take care of me, and let me, intentionally go forward from here on out, knowing that I don't have to do it all at once.
I love that. That's such a great way to end our conversation today, just to really be taking yourself and putting yourself first and having that intentionality with decision making and living in the present and using that fear of what could happen in the future to really inspire yourself that you can do whatever scares you today. I love that. So, Arissan, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. This was such a great conversation, and I'm just so grateful that you were able to spend some time to share your story and give some advice to our listeners.
Thanks for having me.
Wow, what a woman. If you liked this episode, please share this conversation with the fabulous gal pals in your life, because sometimes all us women need to hear is someone else's story to then think, if she can do it, so can I. In the show notes, you can find links to the resources we talked about in the interview, ways to connect with both me, Audrey the Career Woman, and Arissan Nicole, and a link to sign up for the distribution list to get exclusive insights into the making of each episode and monthly career development recommendations. Like, subscribe, rate, and follow so you don't miss a future episode of Women Just Like You. See you next Wednesday for another episode of Women Just Like You, where we'll talk to a former teacher and principal who recently left education to pursue a career in operations. And with that, thank you so much for listening to the first episode ever of Women Just Like You. See you on air soon, gals. Bye.